He stood frozen, one hand gripping his cane, the other reaching out toward empty space, toward Max, his guide dog, who was being lifted into the back of a police cruiser. The officers didn't even look at him. His voice trembled. "Please, don't take him. He didn't do anything." Max whimpered once, tail tucked, trained to stay calm, even under stress. But Ethan wasn't calm. The 17-year-old had lost his sight in a car crash that killed his mother, and Max had been the only thing anchoring him since. Now, in broad daylight, in the middle of their picture-perfect American suburb, Max was being taken from him like stolen property. The neighbors watched silently. Phones out, some recording, some pretending they weren't. No one spoke up. No one asked why a blind black teen service dog was being taken away. No one asked why the HOA president, Margot Bennett, was standing nearby with a smug little smile under her designer sunglasses. Judge Carter stood on the steps of his porch, not in his robes, not in his courtroom, but every inch the man who had seen decades of law used and abused. He didn't shout, he didn't curse, he didn't cry, he just watched, with an intensity that made even the police glance back nervously. They didn't know who he was. Not yet. "Sir, we have orders to remove the animal due to multiple complaints," one officer said without meeting his eyes. "What complaints?" he asked calmly. Too calmly. "Allegations of aggression. The dog reportedly lunged at a child in the neighborhood," the officer said. "We're just following up on a public safety matter." Max? Aggressive? The thought would have been laughable if it wasn't so cruel. Max was a trained service dog. He didn't bark, he didn't lunge. He stayed by Ethan's side through everything: doctor visits, school sessions, even Ethan's quiet breakdowns at night. But this wasn't about Max. It was about what Max represented: a blind black teenager who didn't fit Margot's vision of a clean, uniform, white picket fence America. Margot finally spoke. "It's for community safety. We've had too many situations lately." Judge Carter turned his head slightly, just enough to look directly at her. "Have you filed a police report?" he asked. She hesitated. "I've filed complaints with the board." "That's not the same as a legal report." "Well, perhaps if certain residents followed the rules," she smiled without warmth, "we wouldn't be in this position." Ethan was shaking now. Not just scared, devastated. His whole world was turning into darkness again. He dropped to his knees, reaching out in Max's direction. I can't be without him," he whispered. Max, halfway into the police vehicle, turned his head and barked once. A soft, confused sound. The leash was tight, the moment tense. And still, Judge Carter didn't move. Not yet. The lawman in him was watching, recording, waiting. But inside, a fire had already started. This wasn't just a case of HOA harassment. This was systemic. This was targeted. And he knew exactly how it worked. How quiet racism dressed itself in professionalism and hid behind community guidelines. "Officer," he said again, his voice even lower now, "do you have any evidence that supports these complaints?" The officer shifted uncomfortably. No physical contact was reported. Just a statement from a child. A 6-year-old child. Coached, confused, manipulated. And that's when he saw it. One of the neighbors, an older white woman, lower her phone slowly. She looked at Ethan. Really looked at him. Her lips parted like she wanted to say something but couldn't. Her eyes showed guilt. Still, no one stepped forward. The patrol car door clicked shut. Judge Carter stepped off the porch, buttoning his jacket. He walked slowly, deliberately, each step echoing louder than the last. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make threats. But there was something about his presence now, something that made the crowd shift. He stopped in front of the officer and said, "In the next 30 seconds, I'm going to give you information that will completely change how this ends." Margot scoffed behind him. "Oh, please, don't try to intimidate the police." "I'm not," he said, and pulled a small black case from his inside pocket. The officer glanced at it, opened it, and paused. Federal credentials. U.S. District Court Judge. Real. Irrefutable. The silence that followed felt like a thunderclap, and just like that, everything began to unravel. They had moved into Pine Hill Estates just 16 days ago. For Judge Carter, it wasn't just another relocation. It was a desperate attempt to rebuild what was left after a devastating loss. His wife was gone, his teenage son was blind, and the courtroom victories that once defined him felt hollow now. He chose this neighborhood because it looked peaceful. Clean sidewalks, tall trees lining the streets, good schools, families smiling at open house events. Everything looked so safe. Ethan had been quiet during the move. He didn't complain. He didn't ask questions. He just held Max's leash a little tighter and followed his father's voice from room to room. Max, the golden retriever with calm eyes and steady paws, had been the boy's only constant since the crash. The real estate agent had praised the community. It's tight-knit, secure, HOA managed, very orderly, the kind of place where everyone looks out for each other. What she didn't say was, as long as you blend in. Judge Carter never revealed his profession during the buying process. He didn't want favors. He didn't want fear, just normalcy, just a father and son looking for peace. And for the first 2 weeks, they got it. Neighbors waved. Kids rode bikes past their house. No one said anything when Ethan and Max walked around the block, Max guiding him with silent precision. Carter would sit on the porch in the evenings, watching Ethan slowly rebuild his confidence step by step. It almost felt like healing had begun, until the envelope came. No postage, no return address, just slipped under their front door like something shameful. He opened it slowly. Inside was a neatly typed letter. Notice of violation, unauthorized animal on premises. Fine $750, immediate removal required. He read it twice, then a third time. His hands clenched the paper without realizing it. He looked up and saw Ethan sitting on the couch with Max's head resting in his lap. The boy was smiling faintly, petting the dog's ears, unaware that someone in this so-called perfect community had just declared war. Judge Carter didn't say anything then. He folded the letter, placed it on the kitchen counter, and poured himself a glass of water. His hand trembled slightly. Later that night, he searched the HOA policies, pulled out Mac's service certification, and reviewed federal ADA laws he already knew by heart. Everything was in order. Max was a certified guide dog, protected under federal law, exempt from HOA restrictions, period. Still, the message was clear. They didn't care. The next morning, he requested a formal meeting with the HOA board. The woman on the phone sounded polite, too polite. She told him he could come in on Friday. That was 3 days away. 3 long days where Carter said nothing to Ethan. He didn't want his son to carry the weight of knowing that his presence, his disability, was being challenged by people who smiled at them from across the street. Friday came. He and Ethan walked into the HOA meeting room with calm posture but heavy hearts. Margot Bennett, the board president, greeted them with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. He placed Max's documents on the table. ADA certification, medical records, proof of Max's training, legal references. Margot skimmed them, then slid the papers back. "This isn't about the law," she said, tone cool and professional. "It's about community standards." Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Max lay still at his feet, eyes alert. "Our residents expect a certain environment," she continued. "Some find certain disabilities unsettling. The visibility of it, I mean." Carter didn't flinch. "Federal law supersedes HOA guidelines." Another board member leaned in. "Do you expect us to ignore the concerns of homeowners just because your situation is unique?" "It's not unique," Carter replied. "It's protected." "Perhaps this isn't the right community for your family," Margot said, voice low and syrupy. "There are plenty of places more suited to special needs." Carter looked at Ethan, then back at her. He didn't raise his voice. But in his mind, a switch flipped. They had just told him in coded language that his son didn't belong here. He smiled faintly, stood up, and gathered his papers. "Thank you for your time," he said. They had no idea what they had just started. It started with a camera. Just 3 days after the HOA meeting, a new security camera appeared, mounted right across from their house. Not on the streetlight, not pointed at traffic. It was aimed directly at their front porch. Then another one appeared, then two, all facing their property. Carter didn't say a word. He simply took out his phone, snapped photos of the new security upgrades, and saved them in a folder labeled Pine Hill Patterns. Then the phone calls started. Animal control showed up on a Tuesday. Ethan and Max had just returned from a short walk around the block. "We received a complaint," the officer said, not meeting Carter's eyes. "Your dog was allegedly growling at children." Carter opened the gate slowly. "You're welcome to observe him. Max hasn't growled a day in his life." The officer inspected Max, who sat calmly beside Ethan. No raised hackles, no signs of aggression, just those steady eyes and that slow tail wag that said, "I'm here, I'm listening, I'm safe." The officer left with nothing to report, but that wasn't the end. 2 days later, another complaint, then a third, all anonymous, all dismissed. Ethan started walking less. Max became more alert. Every time they stepped outside, phones came up. People recorded them from porches, from windows, even from inside cars. One afternoon, Ethan tried to join a group of teens at the community pool. He didn't ask for much, just wanted to sit by the water with Max and maybe have a conversation that didn't feel like pity. Margot showed up within minutes. Loud enough for the whole pool to hear, she said, "Due to liability concerns, all special needs residents must be accompanied by a parent." Ethan froze. Everyone turned. Someone laughed nervously. Max didn't move. He stayed locked beside Ethan's leg. Carter was called from court early that day. He found his son sitting on the back steps, face blank, sunglasses on, Max's head resting on his lap. "Dad, why do they hate us?" "They don't hate us," Carter said softly. "They hate what we represent." "What's that?" "Proof that their perfect world isn't perfect." Carter didn't file a complaint. He didn't knock on doors. He didn't shout. Instead, he documented every voice memo, every email, every letter slipped under their door, every neighbor's glare. He had video, photos, timestamps, even a few anonymous texts from neighbors who said, "I'm sorry, I don't agree with what they're doing, but I can't get involved." He understood their fear, but silence was still betrayal. Then came the HOA's new emergency regulations. All dogs in the neighborhood must now be registered with DNA samples. Service animals required monthly documentation from physicians. Muzzles were mandatory in all public spaces. Fines for violations started at $500. They accumulated quickly. Their fines added up to over $3,000 in just 2 weeks. When Carter contested them, he received a typed letter. "Your constant complaints are disruptive to community harmony. Further disputes may result in lien proceedings on your property." He read the letter twice, then placed it with the others. That night, Ethan barely touched his dinner. "I don't feel safe here anymore," he said quietly. "You are safe," Carter replied. "But they want us to leave." Carter nodded. "Then we won't." Ethan turned his head, not to see but to feel the air shift. "You mean stay and fight?" "No," Carter said. "I mean stay and win." There was a storm building, one Carter had seen before, from the other side of the bench. He had sentenced men for lesser harassment than what was happening here, but this time he wasn't holding a gavel. He was holding evidence. Margot had no idea who she was trying to intimidate, but she would, very soon. It was just another Tuesday morning. Ethan had a mobility training session. Judge Carter dropped him and Max off like usual. Nothing felt off. The sun was out. The street was quiet, peaceful on the surface. He was deep into a federal case when his courtroom clerk rushed in, breathless. "Judge Carter, it's an emergency. Your son called. He's at home. The police are there, with animal control." Carter froze. In 30 years on the bench, he had never left the courtroom mid-session. Until now. He grabbed his coat and keys without another word. The drive felt endless. When he turned the corner onto a street, what he saw nearly made him slam the brakes. Two police cruisers, one animal control van, a crowd of neighbors, phones out, whispers, judgment. And at the center of it all, his blind son sitting on the lawn with his hands shaking, Max's leash slipping from his fingers. An officer had one hand on Max's vest. The rear door of the cruiser was open. Ethan's voice cracked him from the chaos. He didn't do anything. Max didn't do anything. Sir, the dog is being detained pending investigation, the officer said to no one in particular. There's been a report of an attack. Margot's voice rang through the crowd like a poison bell. The dog lunged at a child. We've warned them for weeks. This is about community safety. Just because he's blind doesn't mean rules don't apply. Ethan was crying now, hyperventilating. Max let out a soft whine from the cruiser, confused and helpless. Carter got out of the car slowly, closing the door with a firm thud. He didn't run, he walked. Every step silent, deliberate. He passed the crowd, he passed the neighbors. He passed Margot without even looking at her. He stopped 3 feet from the officer and asked one question. Do you have evidence? The officer blinked. Excuse me? Evidence, Carter repeated. Proof that Max attacked anyone. Just the word of the child involved. A 6-year-old. Any injuries? No. No physical contact. Margot stepped in. Officer, he's trying to intimidate you. I warned you they would pull something like this. This is why communities like ours have rules. Carter turned his head slowly. Enough. The crowd went quiet. Carter's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. He reached inside his jacket, pulled out a slim leather case and handed it to the officer. Inside, federal credentials. United States District Court Judge. The officer stared for a full 5 seconds before looking up again. Judge, Carter? That's correct. A shift rippled through the crowd. Phones lowered. Eyes widened. Margot's smile cracked. Carter didn't blink. This, he said calmly, motioning to the scene, is a direct violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Max is a certified service animal. What's happening here is not only immoral, it's illegal. The officer's hands twitched. We were told? You were misled. Carter turned to the crowd now, his voice still low, still measured. I have documented every false report, every threatening letter, every discriminatory comment, and every visit like this. It's all going into a federal investigation, starting today. Margot's face drained of color. You never said you were a judge, she hissed. You never said you were targeting my son because of his disability, Carter replied. Yet here we are. He walked to the cruiser, opened the back door, and held out his hand. Max jumped out instantly, running to Ethan, licking his face, tail wagging. Ethan collapsed forward, sobbing into Max's fur, the boy's arms wrapped tight around his only friend in the world. Carter knelt beside them, one hand on his son's back. I'm here, he whispered. Officer Daniels stepped away, pulled out his notepad, and began revising his report. Judge Carter, I apologize. I had no idea. Now you do, Carter said. Neighbors began whispering. A few turned their backs on Margot. One of them, an older black woman who lived down the street, stepped forward and placed her hand gently on Ethan's shoulder. Baby, you don't deserve this. Others began murmuring in agreement. Margot tried to speak, but nothing came out. The performance was over. The truth was out, and the balance of power had shifted. Carter didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He stood in the middle of the crowd, Max by Ethan's side, and began reading, line by line, from the evidence he had gathered for weeks. February 2nd, anonymous complaint of dog aggression. No witness, cleared by animal control. February 5th, new HOA regulation requiring service animals to wear muzzles. Not legal under ADA. February 11th, email from Margot Bennett stating, special needs residents disrupt community aesthetic. He paused. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. One man in a golf shirt frowned and whispered to his wife. "Did she really say that?" Carter continued. "I have photographs of targeted surveillance cameras, all facing our home only. I have voice recordings of discriminatory statements. I have letters, unsigned, unaddressed, slid under our door with threats and fines." He pulled out his phone and played one of the recordings. Margot's voice crackled through the speaker. "That boy makes people uncomfortable. I don't care what law he hides behind. He doesn't belong here." Gasps. A woman dropped her Starbucks cup on the sidewalk. No one moved to pick it up. Margot took a step forward, her voice trembling with false confidence. "He's twisting things, taking things out of context. This is all being blown out of proportion." But she was sweating. Carter looked directly at her. "I've taken sworn testimonies from 2 neighbors who witnessed your harassment. You scheduled meetings knowing I was in court. You altered meeting minutes. You manufactured safety concerns." Officer Daniels cleared his throat. "Judge, if you submit that documentation to the city board, it qualifies for a civil rights investigation." Carter nodded once. "Already done. Today's events will be added to it." Margot turned to the crowd for support, but none came. Even her board members were silent. One man, tall, pale, nervous, finally said, "We didn't know it had gone this far." Carter raised an eyebrow. No one knew, or no one wanted to know. Silence. Ethan stood now, Max beside him. His voice was soft but unshakable. "I didn't ask to be blind. And Max, he's not just a dog. He's my independence. You didn't just try to take him. You tried to take my life." The words hit harder than any legal argument. A young woman in the crowd wiped her eyes. A teenage boy who once avoided Ethan at the pool took a hesitant step closer. Margot tried again. "I was only doing my job, protecting the standards of this community." Carter tilted his head slightly. "No, you were protecting your control." He turned toward the crowd. "Let's be honest, this isn't about a dog. It's about what Max represents. A black child with a disability who won't shrink himself to make others comfortable, and a father who won't let ignorance win." A few people nodded. Then more. Officer Daniels took a slow step back, removing his hand from his holster. His posture softened. "Judge Carter, we'll need to document this properly. You have my word, nothing more will happen today." "Cool." Carter nodded again. "Start with Officer Daniels' updated report. Then I'll submit everything to the federal office tomorrow." Margot's phone buzzed. She looked at it, turned pale. Another buzz, another message, then another. She finally stepped back, defeated. The crowd no longer faced Carter. They were facing her. And she had nothing left to say. Neighbors whispered. The HOA board huddled nervously. One by one, the quiet watchers started voicing their own concerns. Complaints that had never been spoken aloud were now being shared in hushed, angry tones. "They told my son he couldn't skateboard on the sidewalk. They fined me for putting up a Black Lives Matter sign. They said our music was too urban." Carter watched it unfold, not with satisfaction, but with quiet validation. He hadn't needed to fight. He had just needed to speak. Truth had done the rest. The next 48 hours changed everything. The silence that once hovered over Pine Hill like a fog was gone, replaced by conversations, questions, anger. Neighbors who once watched from behind curtains were now walking up to Carter's door, some to apologize, some to offer statements, and some to ask how they could help. The very next morning, an HOA board member resigned. By noon, 2 more followed. Margot tried to hold on. She sent out a mass email filled with vague denials, legal jargon, and a plea for unity and perspective. But no one cared about perspective anymore. They had seen the truth. Officer Daniels returned to the house that afternoon. This time, he wasn't there to investigate. He was there to correct the record. "I've updated the report," he said quietly. "There's no evidence of aggression, no threats, just a coordinated effort to remove a child service dog under false pretenses." Carter nodded. Thank you. The officer hesitated. And Judge, I hope you don't mind if I share this story. Not officially, just people need to know what happened here. You can share the facts, Carter replied. Let the facts speak for themselves. That evening, the HOA sent out an emergency notice. A mandatory community meeting would be held at the clubhouse the following night. Full attendance was expected. It was the first time Carter had ever seen the clubhouse full, standing room only. The same people who once avoided eye contact now raised their hands, asked questions, demanded answers. Margot stood at the front with a clipboard and a forced smile. She tried to defend herself, claimed miscommunication, blamed others, but the room wasn't buying it. You lied, someone shouted. You targeted a blind child, another said. We moved here to feel safe, not controlled, came a third voice. Margot looked to her board, but they were stone-faced. One of them, a soft-spoken older man, finally stood. I move that we hold a vote of no confidence. Silence. Then a voice echoed, seconded. Carter didn't say a word. He stood near the back, arms crossed, watching history happen. The vote was held publicly. One by one, hands went up. Even the quiet ones. Even the old-school residents who never got involved. It was unanimous. Margot was removed as HOA president, effective immediately. She didn't argue. She didn't protest. She just left. Ethan, standing beside his father, whispered, Did we win? Carter looked around the room. The people, the unity, the shift. No, he said. We reminded them what winning looks like. That night, the Carter house wasn't just a home. It was a symbol. A new committee was formed. More diverse, more open. New policies were introduced to protect vulnerable residents. Discrimination was no longer a rumor. It was a fight worth facing. Max became something of a celebrity. Families waved when they saw him. Kids asked to pet him. Neighbors brought treats. And the dog who once threatened the neighborhood had become its heart. 6 months later, Pine Hill didn't look the same. Not because the streets had changed or the houses looked different, but because the people had. Gone were the silent nods and forced smiles. Neighbors now stopped to talk, to listen, to care. The HOA board had new faces, diverse, understanding, human. Meetings were open. Policies were clear, and for the first time, residents felt like they had a voice. At the center of it all stood Ethan. The once shy, blind teen who barely left the porch now led monthly advocacy programs from the same clubhouse where he was once nearly erased. He spoke about accessibility, about inclusion, about being seen without pity and heard without interruption. And Max had become more than a guide dog. He was a local legend. The kids called him Captain Max. Parents invited him to community picnics. Local schools even brought students to meet him during awareness events. Everywhere he went, people smiled. The same community that once tried to muzzle him now built a mural near the park entrance, with Max at the center, a leash in his boy's hand, both standing proud. Carter watched it all unfold quietly. He never asked for applause. He never wanted a spotlight. But in moments like these, watching his son speak to a crowd, hearing the laughter, seeing the understanding, he felt something deeper than pride. He felt peace. One afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the rows of neat rooftops, Ethan sat beside him on the porch steps. Max lay stretched out at their feet, ears perked toward the sound of children playing down the street. You know, Ethan said softly, I used to think justice was just punishment. Carter looked over. And now? Now I think it's when people finally get it, when they stop pretending not to see. Carter nodded slowly. Justice isn't the courtroom, he said. It's what we build after the verdict. They sat in silence for a moment. The wind was calm. The street was alive. No one stared anymore. No one filmed them. They were just home. Ethan smiled. You never told them who you were. Not at first. I didn't need to, Carter replied. Sometimes power isn't in what you show. It's in what you stand for. From down the block, a group of kids ran toward the house. Hey, Ethan, can Max come walk with us? Ethan laughed. Only if you promise not to spoil him with treats again. The kids laughed back, already reaching for Max's leash. As they walked off, Carter leaned back, eyes closing for a moment. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like a judge. He felt like a father. He felt like a man who hadn't just defended his son, but had helped reshape an entire community. Because true justice, it doesn't end with punishment. It begins with change. And sometimes it starts with one boy, one dog, and a neighborhood brave enough to finally open its eyes. As they walked off, Carter leaned back, eyes closing for a moment. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like a judge. He felt like a father. He felt like a man who hadn't just defended his son, but had helped reshape an entire community. Because true justice, it doesn't end with punishment. It begins with change. And sometimes it starts with one boy, one dog, and a neighborhood brave enough to finally open its eyes.